Sarah. It was such a perfect day, a promise of summer with cloudless blue skies. Swallows were nesting below the eaves of the caretaker's cottage, and out on the sports field Year 9 were playing cricket and tennis. Everyone thought, when the alarm bell rang, that it was just another fire practice. But the first bombs had fallen on Hamburg and Leningrad, the headmaster said, and a full-scale nuclear attack was imminent. Those within walking distance of the school must go home immediately. The rest should return to the main assembly hall and stay there. Sarah ran through a town gone mad with panic. The traffic had stopped. Cars and lorries parked all along the narrow high street. Men and women, crazy with fear, looted the shops for supplies. Police sirens sounded, and on the housing estate they were tearing doors from their hinges to board up the windows. Sarah's school shoes pounded along the pavements, up the hill past the district hospital, leaving the town behind. A stitch in her side and her lungs heaving for breath made her stop and look back. She saw the street spread out beneath her, the river estuary shining silver in the distance, white piles of the nuclear power station on the opposite bank, and the Cotswold Hills beyond. She had to remember it. Gloucestershire green in the sunlight, a blackbird singing and a wind blowing warm through her hair. With all her senses she had to remember it, all the scents and sights and sounds of a world she might never see again. The roadside was lacy with cow parsley, and they had covered the hedges with sweet white blossoms. Cattle grazed in the fields. A kestrel hovered, and the woods were dreamy with bluebells. She heard a cuckoo calling through the silence. She heard the others running along the roadway ahead. Their voices called to her. Hurry up. You haven't time to stop. Sarah covered 2 miles in 20 minutes. Scattered houses marked the village outskirts, with Monday washing billowing in the gardens. And over the hill the church bell tolled. Sarah's home was in a hollow, 2 renovated cottages made into one. There were lawns in front and borders bright with flowers and an orchard at the back. She entered through the kitchen. Buster barked and wagged his tail in greeting, but she paid him no heed. She went into the living room where her stepmother was nailing a blanket over the window. Is it true? Sarah gasped. Don't ask stupid questions. Veronica snapped. But the nuclear war was 1,000 miles away. Hamburg was in Germany, Sarah said, and this was England. She could not believe that anyone would drop atomic bombs on England. They already had, Veronica informed her. The BBC had stopped transmitting a few minutes ago, and Radio Bristol reported London had been hit. Stay in your houses, the announcer said. Give me a hand, Veronica said grimly. Sarah helped her hump the mattress from the double bed and drag it downstairs. They took the spare one from the guest room and wedged both against the window, shifted the sideboard to hold them in place, and stacked the bookcase on top. It was what the radio announcer told them to do as protection against flying glass. Daylight came in through the open doors, but the room was dark and Sarah switched on the light. Will Daddy be home? She asked. Use your head, Veronica retorted. Sarah bit her lip. Her father was teaching at Bristol University and would not have time to drive home. And Veronica did not mean to be unkind. She was doing everything she could to keep herself and the children alive, and she did not have time to think of Sarah's father. Gather all necessary belongings into one room, instructed the radio announcer. Seal the doors against nuclear fallout. The door to the kitchen still remained open, but Veronica sealed the door to the hall with sticky tape. There was nothing left for Sarah to do. In the gloomy light she saw tinned food piled in a corner, bowls and buckets filled with water, the camping stove and gas cylinder brought in from the garage, half a sack of potatoes and Grandma's commode. The settee was piled with clothes and bedclothes, pillows and cushions, books and cups and saucepans, polythene garbage bags, Catherine's Barbie doll and William's Tonka truck. William and Catherine, who had returned from the village school long before Sarah came home, had made a camp under the dining table, draped with blankets and boxed in with mattresses from their own and Sarah's beds. They laughed and giggled and thought it was fun. And Buster was under there with them, yelping and barking in some rough and tumble game. Get that dog out of here, Veronica told Sarah. It was a terrible thing to do. William screamed and clung to him. He was only 5 and did not understand. They might have to stay indoors for weeks, everyone shut inside the living room and never going out. They could not have Buster with them. They would probably have to eat his dog food, and they might even have to eat Buster himself. On her hands and knees Sarah crawled beneath the table and dragged the dog from William's arms. He'll be all right, she said consolingly. He can catch rabbits, and it might only be for a little while. Mummy doesn't want him to wee on the carpet, that's all. She carried Buster outside and set him down, watched him frisk across the orchard. She had to remember. A fat cocker spaniel in the last bright moments of life. Sunlight among the apple leaves, a scent of wallflowers, and the mass colors of polyanthus. She had to remember the large plantation beyond the orchard wall, sheep bleating on the common, and the church bell tolling. Dong. 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 Sarah looked up at the blue heavenly sky. In the end, people turned to God. But the death that would come was nothing to do with him. He, and the world, and the whole of creation were about to be destroyed. Away to the north she heard a rumble of thunder, or maybe a nuclear explosion. It did not matter which. Nothing mattered anymore. All art, all knowledge, all civilization, evolution and eons of time were meaningless now. Up from the river the seagulls drifted like scraps of blown paper. Their bird voices screamed as she wanted to scream. Scream out her anger and despair, the single word, the one almighty question. Why? Catherine came running from the house. Birmingham. Birmingham. Catherine shouted. Mummy says Birmingham has been hit and you're to come inside. She stopped and touched Sarah's arm. Oh look, there's a butterfly, she said. It was a small tortoiseshell sunning its wings on a clump of purple albrietia. It was the last thing Sarah saw. A butterfly among flowers and Buster's brown doggy eyes laughing at her from the shadows of the apple orchard, before she went inside and closed the door. When Sarah closed the kitchen door, the last of the daylight was shut out and Veronica went to work with the sticky tape. Already the room felt like a prison. The electric light seemed gloomy and unreal, the atmosphere hot and stuffy. Veronica pushed newspaper into the keyhole and the voice of the radio announcer droned on. Stay where you are. Remain in your houses. Close all doors and windows. Secure one room against fallout and flying glass. Do not go outside until you are told it is safe to do so. Sarah stopped listening. She sat on a dining chair, chewing her fingernails, and wishing her father would come home. Stop doing that, Veronica said angrily. Guiltily Sarah stopped. Remain in your houses, said the radio announcer. This is my house, Catherine said from beneath the table. I'm going to live in it forever and ever. And you can, William. What about my tea? Said William. We can have tea here, said Catherine. And dinner and supper. The man says we mustn't go out at all. Suppose I want to go to the toilet? Said William. Mummy says we have to go on the commode. And Sarah? Sarah felt sick at the thought of it. They would have to live with the stink, all of them together in the closed-in room. A few flies buzzed around the lampshade and Veronica's lips twisted in distaste. Like Sarah, she realized their sanitary arrangements were totally inadequate, but it was too late now to fetch the disinfectant from the bathroom. Remain in your houses, the radio announcer repeated. Do not go outside until you are told it is safe to do so. Then, quite suddenly, his monotonous voice stopped talking. And a few moments later the lights went out. This is it, Veronica said grimly. Bristol? Asked Sarah. It's all dark. Catherine shrieked. I don't like it. I want to be with you, Mummy. Stay where you are, Veronica said urgently. Sarah and I are right here in the room and the dark won't hurt you. You must stay under the table and look after William. I'm not afraid of the dark, William said scornfully. Then you look after Catherine, Veronica said. Sarah's whole body was tense and listening. It was very dark in the room, but a faint line of sunlight showed through the weave of the blanket at the top of the window. She heard a rumble in the distance, a great wave of sound that came sweeping towards her, engulfing everything in its path, drowning Catherine's cries. Sarah blundered towards the fragile edge of light as the blast struck the house. Roof tiles smashed and the windows were blown inward. Books and ornaments and light fittings crashed and fell in the upstairs rooms. In the howling darkness the mattress sagged and the bookcase started to topple. The black human shape that was Veronica screamed at her to help. But Sarah was already there, moved by her instinct, exerting force against force. The blanket tore at its nails, came loose at one corner. Heat screamed through the crack. Sarah had one brief glimpse of devastation, a hurricane of tearing trees and whirling leaves, the sky gone dark, unlured with fire, before the wind passed over them and things sank back into stillness. Catherine was sobbing beneath the table. Fragments of glass slipped and fell. The air was stifling. "Is it over?" Sarah asked. "That was just the beginning," Veronica said brutally. "We don't stand a chance." Sarah cried. "There's a torch on the mantelpiece," Veronica told her. "And the hammer is beside it. I'll need some nails too. Hurry up." Veronica removed the bookcase and nailed the blanket back into place. They had to have something heavier, she said, and between them they managed to lift the settee on top of the sideboard. It was made of leather and horsehair and its carved legs hooked over the back. Sheets and blankets were jammed into the space along the top as the next wave of sound came screaming towards them. They applied their shoulders, all the strength they had, to hold the settee in place as the bombs fell over Bristol and Cardiff, Cheltenham and Gloucester, and the great winds followed, a roaring tide of heat and darkness that smashed like a gigantic fist against the house. Even through the thickness of the walls Sarah seemed to see it. Pale bright hues, impressions of colors that flashed and pulsed, rose and gold and red vermilion, impaled on her eyes as the wind screamed through the broken upstairs windows and the barricade shattered. Wave after wave of thundering sound beat at the doors and walls of their sanctuary, until it faded away into silence. They listened and waited. Buster was howling outside, and in the hall the grandfather clock struck 4, a silly incongruous sound. It had been a very short war, and they heard nothing more. "I guess it's over," Veronica said. "Bristol?" asked Sarah. "Everything," Veronica replied. Sarah let go. She was weak and shaking. There was a pain in her shoulder where the wooden frame of the settee had cut into her flesh, and her hands hurt so much she could hardly bear it. She sat in the dark on the dining chair, biting her lip. Veronica switched on the torch. "Are you all right?" Sarah wanted to cry, weep like a small child, pretend Veronica was her mother, cling to her for comfort like William and Catherine always did. But she and Veronica had never been close. She was just the woman her father had married, mother of William and Catherine, but nothing to do with Sarah. "Do you think Daddy's still alive?" she asked. "If he is," said Veronica, "he won't be able to come to us. There's no point in hoping, Sarah. We're on our own." "We don't even like each other very much," Sarah mourned. "Then I suggest we start," Veronica said crisply. "Because all we have is each other." Sarah bent her head. Slow tears trickled down her cheeks. "I can't bear it," she said. "I want my tea," said William. "What about Buster?" Catherine sobbed. "And this is the way the world ends," Veronica murmured. Not with a bang, but a whimper. That first evening was strange and special, as if it was someone's birthday, a change from the usual household routine. They ate by candlelight. Fish fingers, crinkle-cut chips and green beans, with thawing ice cream for pudding. Food which Veronica had taken from the freezer and had to be used up quickly. Water was precious and could not be used for washing up, so they wiped their plates clean with paper tissues which they threw in the empty fireplace. Milk also would not keep for long. Veronica made custard, filled a thermos of cocoa for later to save on the gas, and stood the remaining 2 pints in a bowl of water to prevent it going sour overnight. Afterwards they played guessing games and Sarah read fairy stories by Hans Andersen. They tried not to listen to Buster whining outside the window, his claws scratching at the woodwork, begging to come in. Veronica said he had to stay out there, so they all sang songs to help William forget, their voices drowning the pitiful doggy sounds he made. But always, in the background, Buster remained. And the candle lasted only 4 hours. It was 8:30 by Sarah's digital watch, green luminous time ticking away the seconds as Buster scrabbled and whined. They must all go to bed, Veronica said, because there were only 12 candles in the packet and they could not use more than 1 a day. In the yellow beam of the torch they made up beds on the floor. William and Catherine on the mattress under the table, and Sarah in the space by the hall door. They heaved the settee from the sideboard for Veronica to sleep on and the room snapped back into darkness. "We haven't washed," said Catherine. "Or cleaned our teeth." "You can be excused for tonight," Veronica said. "Can we be excused tomorrow as well?" Catherine asked. "Yes," said Veronica. "Now go to sleep." It was a hot still night, windless and quiet, 9 o'clock by Sarah's watch and probably still light outside. Unless it were dark, she thought, like Good Friday when Christ was crucified and the skies turned black reflecting the evil of mankind. She imagined the darkness covering the earth, a world where the sun ceased to rise and nothing lived, or grew, or flowered. She imagined the dust of fallout blowing across the ruins of their civilization, burying buildings and people. It was a terrible punishment for a 15-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong. Catherine and William whispered and giggled beneath the table, but then Buster returned the wine under the window again. He wanted his supper, William said, and demanded he be let in. Veronica tried to explain. One night without supper would not hurt him. He was too fat anyway. Maybe tomorrow they would let him in. But William went on asking, his small boy's voice growing querulous and tearful in the darkness. Finally Veronica shouted at Buster, loudly, and was precious and could not be used for washing up, so they wiped their plates clean with paper tissues, which they threw in the empty fireplace. Milk also would not keep for long. Veronica made custard, filled a thermos of cocoa for later to save on the gas, and stood the remaining 2 pints in a bowl of water to prevent it going sour overnight. Afterwards they played guessing games and Sarah read fairy stories by Hans Andersen. They tried not to listen to Buster whining outside the window, his claws scratching at the woodwork, begging to come in. Veronica said he had to stay out there, so they all sang songs to help William forget, their voices drowning the pitiful doggy sounds he made. But always, in the background, Buster remained. And the candle lasted only 4 hours. It was 8:30 by Sarah's digital watch, green luminous time ticking away the seconds as Buster scrabbled and whined. They must all go to bed, Veronica said, because there were only 12 candles in the packet and they could not use more than one a day. In the yellow beam of the torch they made up beds on the floor. William and Catherine on the mattress under the table, and Sarah in the space by the hall door. They heaved the settee from the sideboard for Veronica to sleep on and the room snapped back into darkness. "We haven't washed," said Catherine. "Or cleaned our teeth." "You can be excused for tonight," Veronica said. "Can we be excused tomorrow as well?" Catherine asked. "Yes," said Veronica. "Now go to sleep." It was a hot still night, windless and quiet, 9 o'clock by Sarah's watch and probably still light outside. Unless it were dark, she thought, like Good Friday when Christ was crucified and the skies turned black reflecting the evil of mankind. She imagined the darkness covering the earth, a world where the sun ceased to rise and nothing lived, or grew, or flowered. She imagined the dust of fallout blowing across the ruins of their civilization, burying buildings and people. It was a terrible punishment for a 15-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong. Catherine and William whispered and giggled beneath the table, but then Buster returned the wine under the window again. He wanted his supper, William said, and demanded he be let in. Veronica tried to explain. One night without supper would not hurt him. He was too fat anyway, maybe tomorrow they would let him in. But William went on asking, his small boy's voice growing querulous and tearful in the darkness. Finally Veronica shouted at Buster, loudly and angrily, told him to go and lie down. Her tone must have reached him, for they heard nothing more. Only William muttering and crying, saying how cruel and horrible Veronica was. He was going to report her to the RSPCA, but after a while he too fell silent. "William's asleep," Catherine announced. "So why aren't you?" Veronica asked her. She wanted to use the commode. Veronica put a large saucepan lid over it, but the smell was still there, strong and obnoxious, lingering in the room. They would not be able to live with it, Sarah thought. They would not be able to live in the stinking perpetual dark with nothing to do and only a few hours of candlelight a day, 4 people trapped in one room and 2 of them children. William and Catherine would not be content with sitting still for the next 2 weeks, just thinking and talking and playing games with their minds. They would more likely drive each other mad. "Veronica?" Sarah said quietly. "What are we going to do?" "Go to sleep," Veronica muttered. "I'm not a baby," Sarah retorted. "We've got to talk." Not in front of Catherine. "She's asleep. I can hear her breathing. We'll never stand living like this, Veronica. We've got to have some sort of plan." "What do you suggest?" Veronica asked her. "I don't know." "Then we'll have to manage as best we can. Live each day at a time and try not to think of it. We'd be better off dead," Sarah said bitterly. "Don't talk like that," Veronica begged. It's true, said Sarah. There's only one thing worse than dying in a nuclear war, and that's surviving. We haven't started yet. Even if we live through the next 14 days, there will be nothing left at the end of it. Just ruins and radiation sickness. No one to help us, no means of living. Even the soil and water will be contaminated. We'll die anyway, so what's the point in trying to survive now? What's the alternative? Veronica asked quietly. We could get something from the chemists. Commit suicide, you mean? Is that what you want to do? Don't you? Sarah asked. Veronica sighed. If it were only myself, I think I wouldn't hesitate. But I've Catherine and William to consider. It mightn't be as bad as we think, and they might still have a future. I've got no right to take it away, Sarah. What about me? Sarah asked. I can't answer for you, said Veronica. Sarah chewed her fingernails. A sick, heavy feeling lodged in her stomach, a dull acceptance that was worse than fear. She sensed that the future held no hope, at least not for herself. But Veronica was compelled to live for the sake of William and Catherine, and so too was Sarah, because that was the only purpose she had left. Sarah awoke in the stinking, stifling dark to the sound of Buster howling around the walls and William asking to get up. It was not time, Veronica said. But Sarah's watch showed 10 minutes past 10. It was Tuesday morning, the late beginning of another day, and Veronica was trying to delay the start of it. Go back to sleep, she said curtly. But William had slept already for 13 hours and would not sleep again, not with Buster yelping outside. He wants his breakfast? William said angrily. And I do, said Catherine. We have to get up sometime, Sarah said. Veronica switched on the torch. In her crumpled clothes, her hair disheveled, she rose from the settee and crossed the marbles of the floor. There were tear stains on her face and reflections shone on the blank television screen. A photograph of Sarah's father watched from the mantelpiece as she washed in a bucket of cold water and ran a comb through the tangles of her hair. Then she lit the second candle, switched off the torch, and lifted the blanket that draped the table. All right, you can come out now. Wash your faces and hands in the end bucket and find something to wear. You said we didn't have to wash, Catherine reminded her. So get yourself dressed then. I want to stay in my house. You can't stay in there all day. I shall stay in here forever and ever, Catherine said stubbornly. I'm going to let Buster in, said William. You are to leave him where he is. Veronica snapped. You said he could come in. William argued. Tomorrow, you said. And this is tomorrow. He can come in later, Veronica promised. I want him to come in now. William stamped his foot. Do as I tell you. Veronica scolded. And come away from that door. I hate you. William screeched. Sarah wiped her face with a wet flannel, pulled on her jeans and a t-shirt as Veronica cooked bacon and sausages, and sliced tomatoes over the camping stove. Already the situation was beginning to get on Veronica's nerves. Catherine behaved well. She tidied her house below the table, made a tablecloth with a spread-out newspaper, and ate her breakfast with 2 slices of bread and a mug of tea. But William refused to change from his pajamas. He sat and sulked in the corner by the settee as Buster howled outside and the sausages and bacon congealed on the plate. I don't want no breakfast, William said savagely. If Buster's not having any, then I'm not having any neither. So there. And you'll be sorry then when I'm starved to death. Don't count on it, Veronica said brutally. Someone had to get through to William. Someone had to explain about Buster and persuade him to eat. But Veronica was in one of her moods, brooding and silent, eating her breakfast at the far end of the settee. It had to be Sarah. It had to be Sarah who put aside everything she felt, who dug deeper than grief or worry into the still quiet center of herself, and did what Veronica could not. She sat on the floor beside her small half-brother and took him in her arms. He was the only reason she would go on living, and she gave him all she had. Her pity, her comfort and her love. And perhaps she had never loved William before, but she loved him then. And she told him what he needed to know. Outside there was dust, falling like snow, and if they opened the door to let Buster in, the dust would come in too, and kill them. He had to be brave and strong, do what Veronica asked, and eat his breakfast. Will the dust kill Buster? William inquired. Yes, said Sarah. Why tell him that? Veronica said angrily. Because it's true, said Sarah. And he has to know. It was odd how easily William accepted that Buster was going to die, how he could talk of it without tears or emotion and eat his breakfast as he did so. And when the room snuffed back into darkness, it was William who shouted, "Go away, Buster. You can't come in." Poor little Buster, Catherine sobbed. Jesus will look after him, Veronica told her. Jesus would not give him food and water, Sarah thought. And nor could she and Veronica sit there and let Buster die. Not even Veronica could be that uncaring. Underneath she would be feeling it, suffering it, the slow sad lingering hours and days of Buster's life. Sarah knew that in the end she would give in and go outside. For a gold cocker spaniel Veronica would die. And then Sarah would be left alone to keep William and Catherine alive, foraging among the ruins of a village when their food supplies ran out. She tried not to think of it, but in the hot dark room there was nothing else to do but think. She could find in her thoughts no hope or consolation, but neither did she dread the time that was to come. Perhaps she was beyond fear. That moment when she had taken William in her arms had awakened something inside her. A calm and strength as she had never known before. She felt there was something in her own being which nothing could destroy, that whatever occurred, however terrible, Sarah knew she could bear it. There was nothing left that Sarah could want for herself, or even hope for. What remained of her life belonged to them. To William and Catherine and Veronica, people trapped with her in the wailing, whining, grieving, bickering dark. She was adrift, in a black sea of time, awaiting her cue to placate, or comfort, or mediate. Knowing how to pity, she did not need to forgive. The stench of human excrement, Buster's sad doggy song going on and on, William's anger and frustration, and Veronica's moods of violence and despair. "Why can't I watch television?" William asked. "Because there's no electricity." Veronica snapped. "How many more times do I have to tell you?" "Then why don't you switch the lights on?" William said furiously. "Then we'll have electric, won't we? And I can watch television then." Sarah tried to explain. She told him about power stations and power lines and the effects of nuclear war. There were no main services. No lights, no water, no television, no schools, no hospitals and no delivery vans. The world as they had known it was gone. William listened and questioned and finally, in his own 5-year-old language, he understood. There would be no chocolate, no Atari space games, no trips to the supermarket, no cowboy films, no birthday parties and no Father Christmas, ever again. Just ruins and dust, cold baked beans for dinner when the gas ran out, and 12 more days of almost total darkness. And not even Veronica could change things, Sarah said. She might be his mother, and she might be grown up, but she could not put things right. "So you mustn't blame her because you can't watch television," Sarah reasoned. For several minutes William thought of it. In the dark, he concluded, you can't do nothing much. "Blind people can," Catherine said smugly. "Blind people have white sticks," William said scornfully. "Not all of them," said Catherine. "Mrs. Weatherby doesn't, and she can do most things. If we were blind we could do most things too. We could find your Tonka truck, William. And my Barbie doll." Sarah held her breath. Catherine was only 8 but her child's imagination had seen a way to live in the dark without eyes. They did not have to be helpless. They could hear sounds, distinguish things by touch. They could restore order to the chaos of the room, clear the floor and learn to move about. They could play the blind game. It would give them a purpose, fill the empty hours between one meal and the next. And a steak from the potted begonia could be William's white stick. "Listen," said Sarah. "We are going to play the blind game." Veronica said she was not in the mood to play games, but she did tell them what to do, her voice organizing their activity. They emptied the cardboard box of the last of the freezer food, packed it full of glass and crystal from the sideboard which they would never use again, and stowed it in the corner behind the easy chair along with the contents of the drawers. The drawers were used for socks and underwear, and the sideboard shelves were used for storing clothes, everything neatly folded and put away. All the unnecessary things the room contained were also dumped in the corner. Vases and ornaments, the magazine rack, books and the reading lamp, and the silver coffee set Aunt Maud had given for a wedding present. The bookcase became a food store and Catherine arranged the tins on the shelves, stacked saucepans and crockery along the top. They moved Sarah's bed behind the settee and made a toilet in the alcove by the hall door. William and Sarah between them hammered nails into the wall, made a line with a piece of string and hung a blanket over it, hoping it would hide the smell. When they relit the second candle, the room looked strange and tidy. Bang! Children of the dust. Chairs stacked on the sideboard, the furniture moved to unfamiliar places around the walls, a central space, and private shadowy territories. William, who had an apartment in the second easy chair, sat fiddling with the wheels of his Tonka truck as Veronica cooked beef burgers, peas and the rest of the crinkle-cut chips. They had cold custard and a carton of thawed raspberries for pudding. It was an amalgamation of tea and dinner, the grandfather clock striking 5 on a May afternoon. But time and seasons had lost their meaning. They ate because they were hungry, and it might have been winter in the darkness and candlelight and stuffy inside warmth. They even lit a fire, burned the rubbish collected in the hearth, the litter of civilized pre-packaging and paper tissues. For a while the room was bright and cheerful until the last flame died. Then they were back in the darkness again, each one sitting alone in their allotted places. "I'm in my house," said Catherine. "I'm in my apartment," said William. "Where are you, Mummy?" Catherine asked. "Blackpool Beach," Veronica said wearily. Sarah was sitting on her bed behind the settee. And the grandfather clock chimed 6. "We ought to start food rationing tomorrow," Sarah said. "And we could all do with a proper wash." "Body smells and dirty clothes," Veronica murmured. "What's the point in trying to keep up civilized standards?" William's Tonka truck zoomed across the carpet. "I haven't heard Buster for ages," said William. "I expect he's dead," said Catherine matter-of-factly. "Not already," Sarah said firmly. "He must be asleep somewhere," Veronica said. "Or dying of hunger," William said. "What will you do about him?" Sarah asked Veronica. Veronica made no answer. "You'll go and see to him, won't you?" "I can't just leave him to die," Veronica said. "Will you go now? Today?" Veronica sighed. "I'll go tomorrow," she said. "Starvation won't hurt him for one more night." Perhaps, Sarah thought, it was something to look forward to, Veronica going outside. It would make their isolation easier to bear, knowing the world was still there, seeing the trees and the houses. It would help them to realize there were others like themselves. Fat Mrs. Porter across the common, the Spencers in Brookside Cottage, Harrogate Farm on top of the hill. There would be flowers still blooming in the garden, leaves on the apple trees, birds perhaps, and animals, because, of course, the world had not yet ended. It would die gradually, just as they would, and perhaps through Veronica's eyes they would see it again before its beauty was gone. When the candle was lit to mark the beginning of another day, Sarah took the sewing basket from beneath the television table. She made a pair of bloomers from a black polythene garbage bag, with shirring elastic at the waist and legs. She made a tunic with elasticated sleeves from a second garbage bag, and from a third she made a pair of over socks which reached above Veronica's knees. Her body was completely covered. A transparent freezer bag with pinprick holes to let in the air made a helmet, and there were rubber house gloves in the kitchen drawer. Dressed in her makeshift protective clothing, Veronica made ready to go outside, and Sarah peeled away the sticky tape from around the door. "You'd better go under the table with William and Catherine," Veronica told her. Sarah nodded, blew out the candle, and crawled into the stifling blanketed darkness of Catherine's house. How Catherine could stay under there for hour after hour was quite beyond her. She thought she would suffocate with every breath. She could feel the heat of William's body beside her as she listened to the opening and closing of the door, the shuffle of footsteps across the kitchen, and the rattle of the safety chain. Muffled by walls came Buster's joyful breathing, whimpering and whining, and Veronica's indistinguishable replies. "I want to go and see Buster too," said William. "You could make me a garbage bag suit, Sarah. There's one behind the chair. We could empty the things and I could go with Mummy." "It's too dangerous," Sarah told him. "Little boys have to stay inside," Catherine said crushingly. "I'm not a little boy," William said furiously. "Listen," said Sarah. They could hear Veronica walking around outside the house. The lid of the rain barrel clattered as she gave Buster water. There were sounds from the garage and garden tools falling, Veronica coming back to the house and calling to Sarah. But William was at the door before her and gray daylight flooded the room. "Can we come out?" William asked eagerly. Go back under that table, Veronica said savagely. Sarah pushed William behind her, closed the door to a crack. He screamed and pummeled her, but she would not let him pass. Finally she spanked him, hard around the legs, and sent him screaming into the dark far recesses of the room. Sarah hit me, Mummy. When I come in I'll give you another, Veronica told him. Take hold of this, she said to Sarah. It was meat from the freezer which had not yet gone bad. Beef and liver and 2 packets of sodden vegetables. Veronica also said she would bury the contents of the commode whilst she was outside, and if Sarah would give her the front door key from her purse she would fetch disinfectant from the bathroom and the air freshener spray. Veronica came and went as William continued his tantrum. Sarah heard water flash from the hot water tap and the chink of china. She heard Veronica moving through the upstairs rooms, and Buster whining in the kitchen, but she would not let him into the room for all William screamed. Finally Veronica returned and sent Buster outside, took off her garbage bag clothes and re-entered the darkness. She had brought the Lego bricks for William to play with and clothes for Catherine's Barbie doll, and the room smelled strong and sweet with bouquet of pine. What was it like outside? Sarah asked her. It was gray, said Veronica. Gray and eerie. Semi-darkness, and a windless silence like the hush before the storm. Only the storm had already happened. Flowers battered and broken, trees uprooted in the large plantation, the roof gone from Mrs. Porter's house, and trailing telephone wires. And the darkness was not cloud, Veronica said. It was dust. Dust falling over everything, gray on the grass and the rhubarb leaves, and on the surface of the water in the rain barrel. Depressing, said Veronica. Horrible and depressing. It was radioactive fallout, Sarah thought. In a few days everything would be dead, plant life and animal life choked by the dust, and Buster would not live long. Almost Sarah wished that Veronica had not gone outside. She had wanted to hear about sunlight and flowers, not reality and radioactive dust. Time passed long and grueling, filled with intimations of death, and William plagued them worse than boredom. He was driving Veronica mad with his whining and grizzling and incessant complaints. Catherine used the Lego bricks to build furniture for her Barbie doll, and there was nothing for Sarah to do except help Veronica prepare for the next meal. Using only their sense of touch they cut the joint of beef into tiny fragments, diced carrots and onions, added salt and pepper, half a stock cube and a pint of water, and set it to stew on the camping stove. The flame of the burner shed a small blue light, enough to distinguish the shapes of things, and the smell of cooking grew savory and strong. Every 2 minutes William asked if it were ready. But the stew was for tomorrow, Veronica said. He had to wait until it was cooked, then wait again while she fried the liver and onions and boiled a bag of mixed vegetables. Then William complained that the drinking water tasted funny and made his teeth go all gritty. It was stale and flat in an open bucket and Catherine refused to drink it. Have some from the plastic container? Sarah suggested. It might taste better. But is it safe water? Catherine asked. What do you mean? Sarah asked curiously. You said everything's constipated, and if we eat it we'll die. Contaminated, said Sarah. So I don't want any, Catherine stated. There's no way this water can be contaminated, Sarah assured her. It's got a screw top. Then I'll have some, said Catherine. Sarah poured water from the container into her beaker. Catherine was a strange child, she thought, unusually compliant, never complaining, yet cautious of everything. For hours on end she had sat in the dark of her house below the table, determined to stay there for as long as she had to. It was as if she sensed it was the surest way to stay alive. From a busy, bossy, organizing little girl, Catherine had changed into a child who was remote and self-sufficient, not questioning what anyone did unless it directly concerned her. In her odd adult voice she inquired if the water were safe, making sure, obeying an instinct. And suddenly Sarah realized. Whatever happened to herself and William and Veronica, Catherine intended to survive. It was Saturday, or maybe only Friday. Sarah was not sure. They had stayed in their beds not wanting it to begin, hoping William would sleep right through until midnight. But he had woken at 11:45, hardly midday, and Sarah had lit the candle and set the kettle to boil. Now he waited, naked on the hearth rug as she poured hot water into a bowl. They had to wash and put on clean clothes, Sarah said. And Catherine? Said William. Everyone, said Sarah. And Mummy? Mummy isn't feeling very well. Mustn't we talk to her? Catherine whispered. Best if you don't, said Sarah. She wants to be left alone. In the same bowl of water, Sarah washed William and Catherine, and then herself. Briefly, it made her feel better, fresh and clean, restoring her sense of well-being. She could almost believe that today would be good, and so would William. She mixed powdered milk for the cornflakes and fed them the last slices of bread spread with butter and strawberry jam. Veronica shook her head. She was going without so that they could have more, living on black coffee and one meal a day. Sarah wiped the jam from William's fingers. I'm still hungry, he announced. You've had your rations, Sarah told him. But I'm still hungry. Sarah put a handful of dog biscuits into his empty cornflake dish. It was a large 3-kilo bag which had hardly been started and would last for days. William said they tasted quite nice, so Catherine had some too, helped herself and carefully resealed the bag before retiring to her house beneath the table. Using the same bowl of water they had washed in, Sarah washed the plates and mugs they had used over and over for the last few days, scrubbed away the grime on grease and gravy. I'm going to blow out the candle now, she said. Black despair showed briefly in Veronica's eyes, and was instantly extinguished. The long hours of darkness had begun again. What are we having for dinner? William asked. Stew, said Catherine. The same as yesterday and the day before. It's got to be used up, said Sarah. I'll add some more potatoes. William scrunched the hard lumps of dog biscuit. I want proper dinner, he said. I want custard and beef burgers and chips and strawberry ice cream. Tell Sarah to get me a proper dinner, Mummy. Mummy? Said Catherine. Are you going to feed Buster today? I'll do it, Sarah said grimly. No, Veronica said dully. I'll go. She moved apathetically, groped her way across the room and peeled away the sticky tape from around the door. She did not order William to go under the table. It was as if she no longer cared if he lived or died. A rectangle of gloomy twilight showed briefly and was gone, and Sarah listened to the rustle of the garbage bag clothes as Veronica put them on. Buster must have been waiting outside the door, but his greeting was subdued, and Veronica hardly spoke to him. She said, when she returned, that he did not seem interested in food and the meat in the freezer had all gone bad. She seemed more dispirited than ever, gripped by the hopelessness from which she could not escape. And the world outside was semi-dark, smothered by dust, everything green gone gray. She had seen dead sheep lying on the common, and she had not emptied the commode. If the sheep are dead, said William, we could have one for dinner. No, said Sarah. They died of radiation sickness. And we'll die too if we eat them, said Catherine. I'm fed up with stew, said William. You can have dog biscuits instead, said Sarah. I've just had dog biscuits, William said furiously. He threw the empty dish in the fireplace. And it was one more temper tantrum for Sarah to deal with, one more irrational incident to add to the madness of yesterday. Why doesn't he understand? Veronica said desperately. But William would never understand. He roamed through the darkness, aimless and aggravating, a 5-year-old child dependent on sounds to keep him interested, and the sounds alone were enough to drive anyone demented. He lifted the bucket handle and let it clatter back into place, over and over again, until Sarah shouted at him to stop it. Then he made chimes with a begonia stick on the fireside companion set, a metallic music as the tongs and brush, poker and shovel, rattled and clanged. Sarah removed them and stowed them in the corner with the rest of the junk. After that, William played with the switches on the television, changing channels with loud, irritating clicks, ignoring Sarah when she asked him not to, waiting for his mother. And the reaction came, the same as yesterday. I'm going to kill you in a minute. Veronica screamed. I'll smash your head against the wall. Leave that flaming television alone. William retreated to the armchair, drummed his heels against the side. He talked about dinner, whined and grizzled, wanted a packet of crisps, wanted ginger cake and Mars bars and an orange ice lolly. Everything Veronica could not give him, William wanted and demanded to know why he could not have them. Deprivation was something he had never known before, and Veronica had always been his main source of supply. He refused to accept that what she had always given him she could give him no longer. In a fit of rage, he broke up Catherine's Barbie doll furniture and hurled it into the blind dark space where Veronica sat. You buy me a Mars bar, Mummy. William shouted. Nobody expected Veronica to cry, but she cried then, long broken sobs that racked her body, a human sound of absolute despair. William was shocked into silence, and Catherine, who had been screaming at him for breaking her Barbie doll furniture, was silent too. Sarah groped her way towards the settee, feeling the debris of Lego bricks, not knowing what to do or say. She touched Veronica's leg, her hand, her shoulder. Put her arms around the older woman she had never loved. "Don't cry," said Sarah. "Don't cry, Veronica. William didn't mean it. He didn't mean to hurt you. He's only a little boy and he doesn't understand." "Oh God." Veronica wept. "I can't go on like this. I just can't. It's not only William. It's everything. All of us trapped in this hellhole of a room. I can't stand it. I just can't stand it any longer." "It's only for another 8 or 9 days, Sarah said consolingly. "You haven't been outside." Veronica sobbed. "You don't know what it's like. Everything's dying. There's no way we'll be able to stay alive. Nothing to hope for. No future for any of us. I should have listened to you. I should have gone to the chemist's and got some pills." "No," said Sarah. "There's William and Catherine, remember? We can't give up, Veronica. We've got to think about them, do everything we can to help them stay alive." "I can't," said Veronica. "I can't go on. I can't even try. It's pointless, Sarah. Completely pointless." Sarah stood up. It had to be her. She would have to take on the responsibility Veronica had abandoned. Their lives in her hands. It was a huge undertaking, but she could feel the strength inside her like a great welling of power. She was not alone. In the hushed darkness around her, she could feel a presence, sense the eternal being of which she was a part. She knew it was all for a purpose, that she had to go on. Something in the future was dependent on her. And although she might die, something or someone would survive because of her, and God himself would give her courage. After Veronica broke down, William behaved better. Through the long dark hours he played with Catherine and the Lego bricks, children's voices talking quietly together. Veronica said nothing more. She seemed to be withdrawn inside herself, sunk into a kind of torpor, not knowing or caring what went on. Sarah reheated the stew and William ate it without complaint. But Veronica lay on the sofa, refusing to eat or drink. All she had had all day was a cup of black coffee. It was as if she had lost the will to live, and Sarah was afraid to press her. She put the saucepan to soak in a bucket of filthy water and wiped the plates clean with crumpled newspaper. The fireplace was full of rubbish. Biscuit wrappings, tissues, and the empty cornflake packet. Candlelight flickered and a match flared brightly as she bent to set it on fire. It was then that Sarah noticed. There was dust in the hearth, gray dust falling like soot, silent and deadly. She blew out the match and switched on the torch, shone it around the room. The dust was everywhere, on all the surfaces, floating like scum on the bucket of drinking water. "Is it safe?" Catherine had asked, as if she had suspected it was not. And the dust was inside them now, in herself and William and Veronica, inside their gullets and being absorbed. They had guarded against fallout as the radio announcer had instructed, but they had forgotten to block up the chimney, which was open to the sky. "Veronica," Sarah said urgently. "This water's contaminated." Veronica raised her head. Dead eyes stared at Sarah, uncomprehendingly. Sarah ran her finger along the mantelpiece and thrust it under her nose. "Dust," said Sarah. "Look at it." Veronica stared. Her blue eyes flickered. And she understood. "Where is it coming from?" she asked in alarm. "Down the chimney," Sarah told her. "I'll find something to block it up. We're going to have to clean this room. We'll have to wash everything with disinfectant, and we'll need some more drinking water. You'll have to go and get some. The hot water tap should be all right as it's a closed-in cylinder. And I'll need the Bex Bissell brush and carpet shampoo." Veronica stood up. Suddenly her face displayed purpose. And her voice was calm and controlled. "Go under the table, William," she said. "And stay under there until I've fetched the things we need." "I want to help," said William. "You can help when I come back," Veronica said. "Will I have to help too?" Catherine asked worriedly. "I think we can manage," said Sarah. But there might be dust in my house. And I breathed it when I came out. Am I going to die now? I shouldn't think so, Sarah said. The grandfather clock struck 9 before they finished. The day's candle had burned away and Sarah had lit another. The room smelled sweeter. Disinfectant, furniture polish and carpet shampoo, stronger than the stink of human excrement and stale stew. William had washed the bookcase. The food tins were polished and shiny and the junk was gone from the corner behind the chair. Even the soiled clothes and the dining chairs Veronica had taken outside and dumped in the garage. And she said Buster seemed a little brighter. He had drunk all his water and eaten the meat from his dish, unless it were rats. Veronica had seen the rats gnawing at the body of a dead sheep, and she carried a poker when she went outside to empty the commode. Sarah used new lengths of sticky tape to reseal the door and William filled a beaker with fresh water from the bucket. Candlelight flickered, showing the fireplace empty of rubbish, her father's old duffel coat stuffed up the chimney, and twinkling reflections on the blank television screen. Darkness was bearable with a candle burning and Sarah was reluctant to blow it out. "Leave it," said Veronica. "Let's play cards." "Oh yes," said William. "Strip Jack naked." "And I want to play," shouted Catherine. "We don't have any cards," said Sarah. Veronica produced a pack from her apron pocket. She had been through the front door and fetched them from the study. They sat on cushions on the dampened carpet and played until after midnight. Nobody argued. Nobody said anything hateful, not even William when Catherine won. But William did grow tired and hungry. All he wanted, he said, was a dish of dog biscuits before he went to bed. They did not have dog biscuits. They had a feast. Veronica sliced potatoes very thinly into the frying pan and when they were cooked she stirred in a pinch of dried herbs and 4 beaten eggs. Afterwards they had cocoa made with powdered milk and 2 squares of chocolate each which Veronica had been hiding. "That was yummy," said Catherine. "Yummy, Mommy. Yummy, Mommy," William chanted. "How about cleaning your teeth?" Sarah suggested. "We don't need to," said Catherine. "Because there aren't any dentists now and we won't ever have to go again." "Which is all the more reason to clean your teeth," said Sarah. "Because if they go bad you'll have to have them pulled out with the pliers." Catherine cleaned her teeth like she had never cleaned them before, and William fell asleep in the chair with his clothes on. The stub of the candle guttered and died as Veronica strip washed over a bowl of cold water. Sarah lay in the darkness. She heard human sounds that no longer embarrassed her, Catherine's deep breathing, and the creak of the settee as Veronica settled for the night. "That was 2 extra candles and 4 eggs," said Sarah. "I think we needed it," Veronica replied. "Are you feeling better?" "I'm sorry about today," Veronica said. "Sorry about yesterday too. I had no right to withdraw and leave you to cope. It was selfish, I see that now. Do you really think we can survive?" "I think Catherine will," Sarah said confidently. "Why Catherine?" Veronica asked. "It's as if she knows," said Sarah. "As if she has an instinct. Right from the beginning she wouldn't drink that water, not even when I mixed it with milk powder. She had to have hers from the container. And she hardly comes out from under the table except to go to the toilet. She's managed to avoid contamination and she hasn't been exposed to the dust. I think we have to forget about ourselves and concentrate on her." Veronica thought for a moment. "If we die, how will she survive then?" Sarah struggled to find the words. "I don't know. I suppose we just have to trust. This is how things are meant to be and we're part of a plan. We don't need to see the reason and we can't question it, because the reason's out there, beyond us, with whatever it is that knows. We just do what we're supposed to do and make sure Catherine survives. All we are fragments of some bigger meaning." "You are talking about God," Veronica said quietly. And maybe Sarah was talking about God. For in the end people turned to him. Sarah sat up and listened. Something had woken her. And it came again. A rifle shot in the distance. She waited but heard nothing else. It was 8:20 by her watch and she could have gone back to sleep, but instead she dressed and lit the candle. They had been wrong to put off starting the days, sleeping late and hoping it would soon be over. They needed to get back to a regular routine, the diurnal rhythm of waking and sleeping. Her body clock said it was morning, and her stomach said it was breakfast time. She allowed just enough milk powder to flavor the water and opened the last packet of cereal. Then she set the kettle on the camping stove to boil and made her announcement. "It's time to get up." "I'm up already," Catherine replied. "What's the time?" Veronica muttered. "Time to get up," Sarah repeated firmly. She shook William awake. He was tired and irritable, refusing to wash his face when she told him to, refusing to eat shredded wheat. Shredded wheat was horrible, he said, and he wanted cornflakes. And when Veronica discovered it was only 8:30, she was irritable too. Sarah tried to explain. They needed to discipline themselves to avoid going crazy, and anyway she had heard shooting. "And I did," said Catherine. "It was up on the hill at Harrogate Farm. A person with a gun." "Farmer Arkwright's got a gun," William said darkly. "He showed it to me and Robert Spencer. He said he used it for shooting rabbits and little boys who trespass on his land. I didn't like him. He was horrible. But it might not have been trespassers Farmer Arkwright was shooting. It might have been something else. There were eggs and chickens and a milk house on Harrogate Farm. If Farmer Arkwright had shot a cow he might give them meat," said Sarah. "It would be contaminated but they could still eat it and let Catherine have the tins." "You were suggesting I should go there?" Veronica asked. "We can't live on potatoes," said Sarah. "I'll take the car," Veronica said. "You could drive to the village and get me a Mars bar," said William. "I'd like my own little torch," Catherine said wistfully. "The ironmongers mightn't be looted," said Sarah. "We could do with more candles and another bottle of camping gas. And if we had some clear polythene we could cover the kitchen window and expand our living quarters." "Make a list," Veronica said. They tore the fly-leaf from the Bible, which was the only book Veronica had not thrown out. They listed everything they thought might be available. From the chemist, and the ironmonger, the village supermarket and Harrogate Farm. It was best to go now, Sarah reasoned, whilst the dust was still falling and people remained in their houses. If they waited until the end of the fortnight there would be nothing left. There might be nothing left anyway, but it gave William something to dream about. "Don't forget my tins of Coke and Mars bars," William shouted as Sarah closed the door and resealed it with sticky tape. "And don't forget my beef burgers and fish fingers, neither." Sarah listened to the rustle of Veronica's garbage bag steps across the kitchen floor, the rattle of the safety chain and Buster's soft miserable whine. Veronica talked to him sadly, words muffled by walls, and a few minutes later they heard her drive away. "I hope she remembers my beef burgers," William said anxiously. Sarah blew out the candle. "There won't be any," Catherine stated. "You can't have beef burgers without electric." "In a village there might be electric," said William. "No, there won't. There's no electric anywhere." "How do you know?" "Because I'm in the junior school and you're only in the infants," Catherine said loftily. "We could play at schools," Sarah suggested. "I could be the teacher and you could be in my class." "What's 4 plus 3, William?" "You said we wouldn't have to go to school ever again," William said furiously. "And I don't want to play schools. I want to play cards like we did last night." But last night's party was over and they could not recapture a time that was gone. They could only sit in the blind black dark waiting for Veronica to come home. And Sarah would not risk burning another extra candle. She did not share William's optimism that all the goods they had ordered would be delivered. "No," said Sarah. "How many more times?" And he flung the cards in her face. Lunchtime came and Veronica had not returned. Sarah worried about violence and lawlessness, gangs of looters in a world gone mad. And there was nothing for lunch except potatoes boiled in their skins and a lump of dried cheese which Sarah made into sauce. William refused to eat it. The bookcase shelves were full of tins, meatballs, ravioli, sardines and tuna fish, salmon and luncheon meat, which William wanted instead, and Sarah would not give him. "You can eat what's on your plate," she told him. "Won't," said William. "I'll eat it," Catherine offered. Sarah gave her William's potato. "That's mine," William held. It was a long wearying time without Veronica, having to cope with William alone. Sarah could feel her strength and patience being drained away. And when Veronica finally returned she was not alone. Sarah recognized the gruff tones of Farmer Arkwright. She could not begin to imagine why he was there, but then, loud and deafening, just outside in the garden, came a single gunshot. Buster died with a yelp, was buried in the cabbage patch. Sounds of a shovel and dry earth. Human voices, woman and man, talked for a while and faded into silence. Catherine sobbed beneath the table. William went quiet and slow tears trickled down Sarah's face. Then the car boot slammed, and something rustled outside on the concrete like dry paper. She heard the garden shears snipping through polythene, listened as Veronica nailed it to the kitchen window frame and sealed it with insulation tape. Then the lid of the rain barrel rattled and she went to work with a squeezy mop. "I wonder if she's brought my Mars bar?" William said. He banged on the closed door, trying to gain Veronica's attention. "Have you got my Mars bar?" William shouted. Veronica ignored him, so he pushed against the door and broke the sticky tape seal. His bare feet paddled through dust and soap suds in the eerie half-light. "Have you got my Mars bar?" he repeated. Veronica, when she turned to him, no longer looked like his mother. She looked more like a madwoman, old and haggard, with sunken eyes and matted unkempt hair. She had taken off her garbage bag suit and her clothes were creased from where she had slept in them. Her voice demented. "Get back inside," Veronica screamed. "And don't come out here again until I tell you. There weren't any Mars bars. I'm not a blasted magician." Sarah caught hold of William's arm and hauled him back into the room. He screamed and fought and struggled and hated. Then, in the depths of the armchair, he sat and cried. A 5-year-old child, inconsolable in his disappointment, his expectations finally crushed. Soon, Sarah knew, he would cry for a different reason. Not for the loss of a Mars bar, but for water and bread. Veronica had not found much on her scavenging expedition. The shops had all been looted. But people at the church had given her 2 boxes of matches, a loaf of bread and 3 packets of soup. She had found several bars of diabetic chocolate and 2 dented tins of baby milk among the debris of the chemist's shop, and a few packets of crisps and peanuts in the storeroom behind the pub. But Catherine had her torch, plus spare batteries, 2 packets of candles and a cylinder of camping gas. Eggs and milk and meat had come from Harrogate Farm, and a sack of low-grade potatoes for feeding livestock. The Spencers had gone from Brookside Cottage, Veronica said. She had searched the cupboards hoping to find food, but someone had been there before her, and no one was bothering about staying indoors. "There's nothing left," Veronica said. Dark light filtered through the polythene window and Sarah gazed at the measly supplies spread along the freshly washed countertop. It was not enough to last them very long, and they were bound to eat the contaminated food, the milk and meat, leeks and cabbage from the garden. Either from sickness or starvation they were certain to die. But William munched contentedly on a crust of bread and jam. "What's in this box?" he asked. "Nothing for us," Veronica said. Sarah opened it up. It was a gift for a world that would grow again, a world that she and William and Veronica would never see. Sarah stared at the packets of seeds. Peas, beans, onions and turnips, carrots and sweets, every vegetable imaginable. There and then they could have grown the cress seeds on a metal tea tray in a bed of newspaper, but she carefully replaced them and closed the lid. This box was for Catherine, an inheritance for life in a world where money was useless, where gold had no value, where stocks and shares were just so much waste paper, and industry was gone. The rest of the day was spent in the kitchen. There was just enough light to see by, a dreary perpetual twilight with a nuclear ash falling like snow over the outside land. Veronica never said how bad things really were, but Sarah could guess from her attitude, brooding and silent as she cooked the evening meal. It was a feast that would kill them. Beefsteak, potatoes and cabbage, with chocolate blancmange for pudding. But it was easier to know and eat it, than cling to the deprivation needed to survive. All Catherine ate were 2 cocktail sausages and a quarter of a tin of baked beans. She ate it from a tray in her house below the table and would not come into the kitchen, not even to play cards. Sarah peered through the gloom trying to distinguish hearts from diamonds, clubs from spades. There was no enjoyment, just a sense of duty, an obligation to keep William entertained. Growing cold and the evening darkness finally drove her inside and, all over again, after the comparative freshness of the kitchen, the stench of human excrement was foul in her nostrils. Candlelight flickered and the door closed her in, and the long hard hours stretched all the way back to the morning. It was 9 o'clock, but still William was not tired. Sarah played more card games, fed him cocoa and dog biscuits, and read stories from the Bible. He was asleep in the armchair by the time she reached Noah, but Catherine wanted her to read on. "And God looked on the earth and saw it was wicked," that men had corrupted his ways with their evil and violence, and he decided to destroy them with the earth. Is that what God's done now? Catherine asked. He didn't make the bombs, said Sarah. But he knew we were wicked, said Catherine. Maybe she was right, Sarah thought. Reports of evil and violence had appeared every day in the newspapers and on the television, and God had done nothing to stop them destroying themselves. When I grow up, Catherine said decisively, I'm not going to be wicked. And I'm not going to let anyone else be wicked either. Then God won't have to do this again, will he? It wasn't God's fault, Sarah said doubtfully. It wasn't ours either, Veronica said. I suppose it was the government, said Sarah. But who elected them, Veronica? People like you and Daddy, and now we suffer for it, Veronica murmured. I'm not going to have a government when I grow up, said Catherine. I'm going to live in the Garden of Eden, like Adam and Eve. Only there won't be any serpents because they've all died in a nuclear war. Catherine could still dream. But Sarah had to face the reality, words out of darkness, Veronica telling her what it was like outside before she slept. People were not even trying to survive, Veronica said. It was like one big party, terrible, tragic, everyone congregated together in the church and the chapel and the school. Some of them were sick already, and they were all half-starved, yet they were willing to share what they had. Farmer Arkwright, Joseph and at the bakery, the poultry farm on Winnow's Hill, were delivering everything they could to the centers. As the cows fell sick, Farmer Arkwright intended to shoot them and butcher the carcasses. It was kinder that way, Veronica said, and she had asked him to shoot Buster out of kindness. But you can't shoot people, Veronica stated. Not even when you know they're going to die. We wouldn't allow animals to suffer such a terrible death, yet we expect it of people. She switched on the torch and went to the sideboard drawer, brought out a bottle of tablets and held them up to the light. Just so you know where they are when I'm gone, Veronica said. Sarah nodded, watched her replace them. However terrible living might become, she could not imagine ever wanting to take them. In the beginning, suicide had been her suggestion, but now the roles were reversed. Veronica foresaw the time when death might be preferable. I think we should face it now, Veronica said calmly. I don't want William to die, slowly and painfully, as Buster would have done. He was bleeding from inside, Sarah. There were sores around his eyes and his fur was falling out. And I've seen those people at the church. You have to promise me, Sarah. You have to promise to look after William when I'm gone. Her voice was pleading and torchlight reflected in the darkness of her eyes, and at the corner of her mouth was a small weeping sore. Something cold and terrible landed in Sarah's stomach. That sore was a symptom of radiation sickness and Veronica was already dying. That was why she thought of William and asked Sarah to promise. In the loneliness and silence, Sarah reached for her hand, sweating and clammy and cold as ice. The precious person Veronica had become would soon be leaving her. I'll look after him, Veronica, she said. And a lump rose to her throat as Veronica smiled. Life was a little easier with the kitchen to move about in, more air, more space, and the gloomy natural light that came through the polythene window. Or maybe they had simply grown accustomed to their situation and become resigned. On the blue linoleum floor, William played quietly with his Tonka truck, built houses out of Lego bricks or playing cards. Sometimes he even played with Catherine, Barbie doll games in her house beneath the table. Most of the time she still insisted on staying there, practicing her handwriting in Sarah's history exercise book by the light of her torch, reading about God and Noah and Adam and Eve, or sewing Barbie doll wedding dresses from the net curtains that had once hung at the kitchen windows. Catherine laughed and chattered like a normal little girl, but the rest of them had changed, as if something inside them were dying, their souls gone dull. There was nothing to do, nothing to live for, or plan for, or talk about. They were gripped by an apathy from which they could not escape, without motivation, waiting to die, their body clockwork slowly winding down. They were not short of food. They had meat and vegetables enough for several days, and enough tins to keep Catherine alive. And when it was gone, Veronica went to Harrogate Farm for more. One by one, as the cows fell sick, Farmer Arkwright slaughtered them, shots heard at morning up on the hill. Daily in the Land Rover he delivered meat and milk to the village centers, and other farmers did the same. But the supplies were not limitless. Joe Sefton ran out of flour for making bread, and eggs got scarce at the poultry farm as more and more chickens died. Veronica said that starvation was no longer a worry, that human deaths were keeping pace with the deaths of animals. They burned the bodies in the churchyard, the smoke of cremations adding to the darkness of the sky. Sarah had no illusions. What was happening to Veronica would happen to herself and William. The sores spread on her face. Her gums bled. Her teeth came loose. And her hair came out in handfuls. And when the church bells rang, peal after peal of joyful clamorous sound, telling them the fortnight was over, nothing changed. Their lives went on, day following day, with the dust still falling on the twilight land. No one advised them it was safe to go outside. There was nothing but crackle from the radio stations, and the days grew colder, and the sky at evening turned to the color of blood. Sarah scrubbed clean the leaves Veronica had unearthed from the garden. Pale dust floated on the surface of the water, and William was plucking one of Farmer Arkwright's chickens for a stew. He was not like the William they had always known. That little boy was gone. He had been outside and seen for himself. A world of dust, rats and flies and putrefying bodies of sheep, Brookside Cottage empty and abandoned, no one to play with and himself alone. He was quiet and repressed, doing what he was told without really caring, his blue eyes empty of life. If I could feel, Veronica said, I think he would break my heart. Sarah knew what she meant. It was strange how they simply stopped feeling, as if something inside them switched off like a safety device. Nature was kind after all. They were spared all the fear and panic, hopelessness and horror, the inevitability of their deaths. They simply accepted it, and quite dispassionately Sarah could watch the spasm of pain that blanched Veronica's ravaged face. Why don't you go and lie down? She suggested. But Veronica gripped her stomach and went outside. It was maybe a month when the shooting stopped at Harrogate Farm and Veronica toiled up the hill for the very last time. She was almost too sick to walk, yet she insisted, and returned an hour later with a dead maggoty chicken and a shopping bag full of tinned food. The Arkwrights were dead, she said. She had found them lying on the living room floor, Farmer Arkwright and his wife, both shot in the head. She had covered them with a sheet and rifled the store cupboard. Tinned corned beef, sardines and pilchards, 2 tins of cat food and a bag of flour. She had not been able to carry the bottled fruit, she said. Sweating and shivering with fever, and clutching her stomach, she went to lie down on the settee, and Sarah sensed it was time for her to take over. She dressed in the garbage bag clothes, fetched the shopping trolley from the garage, and told Veronica she was going. Whatever was left at Harrogate Farm, they needed it. It was Sarah's first sight of the world since the bombs had fallen. A chilling twilight world and a landscape of dust. Grass on the common was covered in gray, and the leaves on the large trees were dying. There was a stink in the wind that cut cold across the common, a buzz of flies, and a rat scuttled from the open doorway of Brookside Cottage. Following Veronica's footsteps in the dust, Sarah dragged the shopping trolley along the road, up the track through the fields and into the farmyard. The stench was indescribable. Blood and bones and the rotting remains of cattle, dung and sour milk in blocked up drains. Rats attacked a sick cow chained in the milking parlor, and somewhere a young calf cried. Sarah gagged and held a handkerchief to her nose, her footsteps soundless in the dust as she went to investigate. Chickens lay dead among the outbuildings, and the storehouse roof had fallen in. She found the calves in a stone-built hay barn behind the implement shed. 5 of them, young and lively, with wide dark eyes. Farmer Arkwright had made them a pen out of hay bales, and the arrow-slit windows were also stuffed with hay. 3 metal troughs brimmed full of water, and bags of calf nuts lay open on the floor. Like Veronica's seeds, they too were a gift for the future, the gift of a dead man to a child who would survive. Sarah built a barricade before the hay barn door. Tools and implements, piles of empty sacks, and wheelbarrows full of manure were tipped in a mound in front of it to prevent it being opened. The calves were for Catherine, and she had to protect her inheritance in any way she could. Sweating and stinking and filthy, Sarah worked until she was finally satisfied. Then she went to the house, loaded the shopping trolley with bottles of plums, gooseberries, strawberries and apple pulp, and entered the boarded-up darkness of the living room. There had been no need for her to go in there, Veronica had said, but she had found a box of cartridges on the kitchen table and she needed a gun. It was under the sheet, clutched in Farmer Arkwright's hand. Dead fingers gripped and let go as Sarah pulled it free. She did not feel anything, neither revulsion nor pity. For Catherine's sake she would do what she had to, flee from the living or the dead. Sarah mashed potatoes with a tin of Buster's dog food, made rissoles for dinner and set them to fry. They would have bottled plums for pudding, she decided, or maybe not. They had had fruit every day since Sarah had visited the farm and William was complaining of pains in his tummy. She opened a tin of creamed rice pudding instead, spooned it into their unwashed breakfast dishes and squirted chocolate sauce over the top. Veronica came shuffling out to empty the commode, clung to the doors and walls for support and made her way into the garden. Her teeth were broken and her head was a mass of oozing sores. Her eyes hurt in the light. A few hours ago she had vomited blood, but still she insisted on doing what she could, rinsed the commode in the rain barrel and came back inside. "William has diarrhea," she said. "He's eaten too many plums," said Sarah. "He's sick," said Veronica. Sarah looked at her. "I'll look after him," she said. Maybe Veronica had needed to hear her say it one last time, for that night when William and Catherine were asleep she said she was leaving. She was just a burden, she said, and no more use. Dumbly in the candlelight Sarah watched her take some tablets from the bottle in the sideboard drawer. "It was better this way," Veronica said. "Better for all of them." And she was no longer afraid of death. It would be a relief. And the God Sarah believed in had no more plans for her. Sarah nodded. This was the moment they had both faced up to long ago and she did not try to stop her. It was not even terrible. The woman who had married her father had become in the end her only friend and Sarah would never see her again. But the time was right and there was nothing left to say, not even goodbye. Maybe later she would cry and feel the grief, but now she simply accepted the end of Veronica as soon she would accept William's and her own. After so much suffering there could be no sadness in letting someone go. "Will you be all right?" Sarah asked. "I'll go to the church," Veronica said. And closed the door. It was the last Sarah saw of her, blue human eyes and a face covered with sores, turning to God. She snuffed out the candle and lay on her mattress on the floor. The room seemed empty now, a dark space where once Veronica had been. She could feel the loneliness like a pain. But by morning it had receded to a dull ache and Veronica was just a memory, a person who belonged to a green lost world and was nothing to do with now. Mummy had gone for a walk, she told William and Catherine, and she did not know when she would be back. They asked no questions. Perhaps they too had gone beyond grieving or caring. They had dog meat rissoles for breakfast and William said his tummy ache was better. But there were sores on his skin and his eyes watered in the gloomy kitchen light. Death seemed to stare at Sarah from William's face, as if it were the only thing left in a world that had once been full of life. She wanted to do something, say something that would make him happy. "Shall we go for a walk?" she suggested. He shook his head. "I don't like it outside," William said. "And I have to stay and look after my Barbie doll," said Catherine. "We might find some tins," said Sarah. "I'm not hungry," said William. Sarah gave him the gun. Veronica had managed to load it and all William had to do was pull the trigger. He was to fire it, she said, if anyone came to the house. And she went out alone. A chill wind blew across the darkened sky, whirled dead leaves from the trees and whipped up the dust, covered the tracks of shoes on the road. The wind that sang through the silence was the only sound and Sarah shivered. Sores around her mouth cracked and bled and small pains cramped her stomach. She had to find someone alive, someone for Catherine. But the houses around the common were blast damaged and empty and from the village she could smell the death fires burning. Not in the church or chapel or the school would she find Catherine a home. Sarah kept to the small lanes around the village outskirts, checking the isolated houses. They were all abandoned, and all she gained were a few tins of food. Dark wooded hills stretched out across the miles showing no light or life. And the July cold intensified as she headed back towards home. A few drops of rain began to fall, pockmarks on the dust, as she went to Harrogate Farm to check on the calves. The barricade was still there, blocking the hay barn door, and when she peered through the crack she saw the calves were alive, shadowy animals moving restlessly within the dark warm womb of a future world, waiting for the child that would claim them, waiting for Catherine. Rain swept across the barren land, black and icy, leaving its gritty traces on Sarah's face and hands. Pools of mud formed on the track, rivulets among the dust. Maybe the fields would grow again. Maybe it would wash the darkness from the skies. Pains gripped her stomach as she ran for shelter in Brookside Cottage, but it did not matter. She had only one thing left to do. She stole the pram that had once belonged to Amanda Spencer, filled it with toys. Action men, Star Wars spaceships, battery-run robots, a sheriff's outfit and six-shooter gun. Everything belonging to Robert that William had envied. He could play with them, Sarah thought. And perhaps he would be happy before he died. How long they had lived without Veronica, Sarah did not know. Days passed quickly even though every minute seemed like an eternity of time. The sores on her face festered and spread. Like William, she suffered from diarrhea and sickness, and not even Catherine could bear to live in the stinking vileness of the living room. Sarah rebuilt her house in the kitchen and removed the barricade from the living room window. It let in the air and twilight and the gathering cold. Just for a few more days they lived like that, but then William vomited blood and she knew they must go. She must take Catherine away. She did not know where, but it had to be now, on the last morning, whilst she still had strength enough to travel. The baby's pram stood packed and ready, and William lay on the settee wrapped in blankets and shivering with fever, too ill to move. His eyelids were swollen and weeping, his golden hair fallen and gone. Sarah knelt beside him, feeling the heat of his forehead beneath her hand. "Catherine and I are going for a walk," she said. William nodded, not really caring. "We might be gone for a long time," Sarah went on. "All day, perhaps. You'll have to stay here, William. I've opened a tin of pineapple chunks. They're here on the floor, right where you can reach them. Do you understand? Will you come back?" William asked feebly. "Just as soon as I can," Sarah promised. Catherine stood in the doorway, unrecognizable in the torn garbage bag suit. She had a handkerchief tied over her nose and mouth and a plastic bag with air holes over the top. She did not yet know that somewhere out in the dark, desolate world Sarah would abandon her. "You can pull the shopping trolley," Sarah told her. "Where are we going?" she asked. "We'll know when we get there," said Sarah. She turned the pram and heaved it through the doorway. Saucepans, dangling from the sides, rattled and banged. There were shoes and slippers and Wellington boots on the underneath rack, and the seeds and rifle and tins of food were hidden inside beneath the jumble of Catherine's clothes. Blankets and a sleeping bag were piled on top and covered with polythene torn from the kitchen window. Nothing showed of any value except for the half-empty bag of dog biscuits. "And that's all we've got if anyone asks," she told Catherine. "Just dog biscuits. Remember that." "Are we going to look for Mummy?" Catherine asked. "No," said Sarah. "We are going to look for somewhere better to live." Dragging the shopping trolley, Catherine followed behind. It was loaded with bottles of fruit that chinked in the silences, with a nightdress, sponge bag and Barbie doll riding on top. Wheels made tracks in the sodden dust and a damp wind blew in their faces. The sky grew darker, an eerie gloom that swallowed the shapes of trees and houses, a wintry cold that chilled them to the bone. They were heading into it, a freezing journey that had no foreseeable end. "I'm cold," said Catherine. "I want to go home." "We'll go home afterwards," said Sarah. She hoped they would not meet any people, but there was no one alive on this side of the village, so they had to go past the church. There was a fire in the graveyard with dark shapes moving around it, and someone leaning on the lich gate watching them approach, a man coming towards them through the morning darkness and a woman following behind. It was the first fear Sarah had felt since the bombs had fallen. "What's in that pram?" the man asked. "Things," said Sarah. "We're looking for somewhere to live." "Food," said the man. "No," said Sarah. "Only dog biscuits," Catherine said fearfully. The woman shuffled forward. "I know you, don't I? It's Sarah, isn't it? Sarah Harnden from across the common. You know Sarah, Ted? Veronica's daughter. She came to us the other night." "Dead," said the man. "Veronica's dead." "And I'm Mrs. Porter," said the woman. Sarah remembered Mrs. Porter. She had been fat once, but now she was thin, bald and shivering in the wind, dying like Sarah was. Catherine was crying because the man had said Veronica was dead, and Mrs. Porter wanted them both to come into the church where everyone else was living. But Sarah had to get away from them. She had to take Catherine away. "I'll move the pram," said the man. "You don't understand," Sarah said desperately. "My sister isn't sick. She's not sick at all. I have to find somewhere for her to live, a person, a place. She can't stay with us." Mrs. Porter stared at Catherine's hidden face. I think we should let them go, she told the man. They've got food. He insisted. Didn't you hear what she said? The child isn't sick. That food is for her. Mrs. Porter turned to Sarah. You go, my dear. You take your sister away. Ted won't stop you. He's not a bad man. Ted spat on the road as Sarah passed. He won't help you, he said bitterly. He'll turn you away, same as he turned us away. And all he'll give you is lettuce. The saucepans jangled, and the fruit bottles chinked in a shopping trolley as Sarah and Catherine walked away along the street of abandoned houses. The fire in the churchyard faded behind them and the man's words echoed in Sarah's head. He would not help them, the man had said, and all he would give them was lettuce. Who had he meant? I don't want to go, wept Catherine. I don't want to go and live with that horrible man. Don't make me go, Sarah. I want to stay with you and William. Johnson, thought Sarah. It had to be Johnson. She remembered going there last summer with her father, driving along a track through the woods. His place was a forestry lodge which had been converted to a small holding, fields growing hay grass and string beans, and a dozen glass houses. She remembered seeing goats in a paddock and a stream with a sheep dip not far away. They had bought 3 boxes of pansies from a bearded man who had said his name was Johnson, and stayed to talk. He said he had moved there from London 5 years ago. Opted out of the rat race, he said. It was miles from anywhere, and his wife had left him, and he had sold his produce at the local market. There were no main services, just an electric generator and septic tank drainage, and his water was pumped from an underground well. Veronica had said she was not surprised his wife had left him, living in such primitive, isolated conditions. He shouted at me, sobbed Catherine. He shouted rude words and told us to go away. All we did was swing on his gate. We never meant to let the sheep in his field. I don't like him, Sarah. You'll like him this time, Sarah said. Spasms of pain racked her body as she pushed the pram down the long road, past Ryland's guest house, and up the hill towards the next village. Sleet lashed her face, and the dark woods waited, and there were 2 miles to go before they came to a turning on the right. And although Catherine cried, Sarah could smile. This was how things were meant to be, and Johnson was part of the plan. Once off the road it was hard walking. The pram jolted over loose stones and the shopping trolley leaked crimson juice from a broken bottle of plums. Fallen trees and broken branches blocked the track, and they had a detour through mountains of dusty undergrowth. Sarah was weak and sweating with the effort, and twice on the way she had to stop to be sick. Then from the high empty hilltop where the trees had been felled she saw the small holding below, glass houses bright with electric light and pale smoke rising from the cottage chimney. I don't want to go there, Catherine said bleakly. I know, said Sarah. But there's nothing else I can do. And he'll look after you, you see. Johnson came to meet them at the bottom of the track, the shape of a man in a navy blue overall, lean and tall in the twilight. An improvised helmet with a curved plastic visor concealed his face, and he carried a shotgun. He had survived like Catherine because he took no chances, and the rifle was aimed at Sarah's head. I don't want to hurt you, Johnson said quietly. But I'll kill you if I have to. I can give you lettuces. Take them and go. Sarah pushed Catherine towards him. I'll go, she said. But I'll leave Catherine here. We've taken good care of her. She isn't sick and she's able to work for her keep. Johnson stared and hesitated. Then lower the gun. I've been waiting for this, he said. You'll take her? Sarah asked. I'm not much good with kids, said Johnson. Never had any of my own, but I'll take her. What did you say her name was? Catherine, said Sarah. Johnson nodded and opened the gate. Bring your shopping trolley, little lady. Alone, without Sarah, Catherine crossed the threshold of Johnson's land and stood forlornly beside him. Live chickens scratched in a nearby glass house, and there were goats and sheep in another. Others contained lettuce, and cucumbers, and unripe tomatoes, trays of seedlings and bedding flowers. The blast had not damaged them. The glass was plastic and the hills formed a sheltering amphitheater all around. It was a good place in which to survive. Sarah parked the pram against the dry stone wall. You'd better have Catherine's things, she said. There's seeds too, and all the tinned food we had left, and a 12-bore shotgun. A gun, said Johnson. You've got a gun? One like yours, said Sarah. Johnson laughed. "This gun's not real," he said. "It only works by fooling people. I carved it out of wood the week after the bombs went off, and painted it to look like real. Real enough to frighten people away anyhow." "They told us in the village," Sarah informed him. Johnson sighed. "What else could I do? I had to turn those poor devils away. I don't have enough food to feed the whole wretched population. Enough for the living maybe, but not for the dying. If food would have saved them, I would have given it willingly, believe me." Sarah did believe him. Johnson was a good man. "Will you come and stay with your sister?" he asked her. Sarah shook her head. "I have to go home," she said. "My little brother is sick. I see you have outbuildings here. There are 5 loot caps at Harrogate Farm waiting to be collected. Nobody knows they're there. I barricaded the barn door to keep them safe, but I think you should have them. You can use Farmer Arkwright's Land Rover, and there's diesel in the tank by the implement shed." A squall of icy rain came sweeping down from the hills, ran like tears down Johnson's face as he lifted his eyes to the sky. He said, if he had never believed in God before, he believed in him now. And this was the beginning of a brave new world. Sarah shivered and pulled up the hood of her duffel coat. She had to go, she said, and looked at the garbage bag figure of Catherine for the last time. Johnson rested his hand on the child's shoulder. "I'll look after her," he said. "I'll teach her to grow. We'll build the world from the dust, she and I. It won't be easy, but we'll do it. A moral society, based on human decency, free people, cooperating without violence, better than the old. There's a nuclear winter coming on, cold like we have never known. But the glass houses are centrally heated. There's plenty of wood. The well water's good. If I can get diesel enough to keep the generator going, if I can scavenge enough hay and concentrates to keep the animals alive, if I can keep the green plants growing, we'll make it. We'll make it anyway, your sister and me." Sarah coughed and smiled. Bright blood flecked the back of her hand, and she did not worry. Johnson was part of the plan, a man with a vision which she herself would never share. Her part was over, her purpose played out. She had lived for Catherine, and now she gave Catherine to him. Finally satisfied, Sarah turned away, leaving man and child together in the rainy darkness. "I'll call you Kate," she heard him say. "And you call me Johnson. There will be others, I expect, but it's you and I who have to make ready." Johnson and Catherine, the pram and the shopping trolley, went rattling away towards the house as Sarah headed home up the long track. She had no reason now to go on living. Death would be a relief, Veronica had said, and in the sideboard drawer the bottle of tablets waited. She would give half to William and take the rest herself, 2 lives ceasing together. It was better that way. Pains gripped her stomach and she vomited blood, and the hood of her duffel coat rubbed raw the sores on her scalp. In a world that was dark and ugly, where the wind whined through the silences, Sarah knew that she was ugly too. Her youth and prettiness, her love and life and hope, laid waste by the holocaust of war. But some things could never be destroyed. A child with her dreams. A man with his visions. And a gorse flower that bloomed in the dust. Sarah touched it, damp yellow petals, gold and fragile and strong. Alive and beautiful, it bloomed for the future, radiated the glory of God. In the end people turned to him, and Sarah could not be sorry.